Albert Speer walked out of Spandau Prison on October 1st, 1966, after serving exactly 20 years. And within months, he had a publishing deal, a best-selling memoir, and a carefully managed reputation as the good Nazi. But the hidden price of that self-reinvention was paid by someone else entirely: his wife, his 6 children, and the slave labor survivors whose pensions barely covered rent while Speer monetized his guilt into financial security. This is the ledger history forgot to balance. Margarete Speer queued at those Spandau gates for 2 decades. Magda Goebbels chose poison for her 6 children in April 1945. Margarete chose something harder: to live. On October 1st, 1946, the Nuremberg Tribunal delivered its verdict: 20 years in Spandau Prison for the man who had served as Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production since February 1942. Speer had orchestrated the deployment of millions of forced and slave laborers across the German war economy. Yet he walked away from the gallows that claimed 12 of his colleagues. The sentence left Margarete Speer alone in occupied Germany with 6 children, the youngest barely 2 years old. While other Nazi widows buried husbands or vanished into rural anonymity, Margarete faced a uniquely public limbo: a marriage frozen behind a Berlin prison wall, jointly guarded by American, British, French, and Soviet sentries. Albert, meanwhile, was already drafting the narrative that would define the post-war decades: the cultured technocrat who claimed he never knew about Auschwitz, the good Nazi who accepted abstract responsibility but denied specific knowledge. That myth would eventually feed his family. First, it starved them. Between 1947 and 1950, Margarete Speer raised her 6 children in conditions that mirrored the hardship of ordinary German war widows, except for one corrosive difference: everyone knew the name. Neighbors crossed streets, schools whispered, job offers evaporated before they arrived. The Krupp family, whose factories had consumed forced laborers by the tens of thousands, quietly rebuilt their steel empire by the mid-1950s. The Flick dynasty regained its industrial fortune. The Quants, deeply implicated in slave labor at battery plants, would eventually become one of Germany's richest families through BMW. But these were balance sheet criminals, faceless to the public imagination. Albert Speer was the face, Hitler's architect, photographed beside the Führer at Nuremberg rallies, sketched in newsreels touring munitions plants. His visibility became Margarete's prison sentence. The family survived on modest savings and the dwindling generosity of a few loyal relatives. There were no industrial dividends, no quiet boardroom rehabilitations, no anonymous corporate cushion. Historians have since noted the bitter mathematics: millions of Germans expelled from the East, raped during the Soviet advance, or executed in occupied territories suffered the violent end of the war. The Speer children suffered something slower: a civil death stretched across 2 decades. They had food, shelter, and citizenship. They simply had no place in post-war society. The name itself became a kind of civic leprosy, marking them in every introduction and every school enrollment form. But the empty pantry was not the deepest wound. The deepest wound was the silence at the dinner table. Biographer Gita Sereni, who spent years interviewing the family, described the emotional climate inside the Speer household as almost Arctic, a near-total absence of warmth, intimacy, or honest conversation. Margarete had married Albert in 1928, when he was an unknown young architect. By 1947, she was the wife of a convicted war criminal, raising children who would read about their father in textbooks before they could form memories of his voice. The marriage did not survive the prison years intact. Letters were censored. Visits at Spandau, when permitted, were brief, monitored, and emotionally rationed across the 4 Allied powers. Albert poured his interior life into secret manuscripts smuggled out page by page. the drafts that would become his best-selling memoirs. He did not pour it into his wife. When he finally walked free in October 1966, the man who returned was not the husband who had been taken away. He was a literary product now, a commodity ready to sell. Within months, he had a contract with Ullstein Verlag. Within 2 years, Inside the Third Reich was a global bestseller. Margarete watched her husband become wealthy and internationally celebrated by selling the very crimes that had cost her family 2 decades of social standing. The children, now adults, watched too, and several of them began to read their father's words with growing suspicion, because the man on the page did not match the man at the table, and neither matched the documents emerging from the archives. Hilde Speer, born in 1936, took her stepfather's surname Schramm and built a life her father could neither predict nor control. She entered Berlin politics on the left, served in the city's House of Representatives for the Greens during the 1980s and 1990s, and in 1994 founded Zurückgeben, literally, to give back, a foundation that channels money inherited from Nazi-era wealth into grants for Jewish women working in scholarship and the arts. The name was a direct rebuke to her father's evasions. Where Albert had monetized confession into royalties, Hilde monetized inheritance into restitution. Her brother, Albert Speer Jr., born in 1934, became one of post-war Germany's most successful architects, designing master plans for cities from Shanghai to Riyadh and contributing to the urban planning of reunified Berlin after 1990. He worked under the same name his father had made infamous, and he made it mean something different. Other siblings spoke publicly, gave interviews, and contradicted the careful self-portrait their father had constructed. They did not deny his crimes. They did not soften them. They refused to participate in the mythology he had spent 20 years in Spandau carefully constructing for his memoirs. Historians now treat the Speer children as an unusual case study, while countless German families of lesser complicity maintained decades of silence about grandfathers in the Wehrmacht or uncles in the SS. The children of one of the regime's most senior figures chose confrontation. They processed inherited guilt by naming it, funding its consequences, and refusing to inherit the lie. Albert Speer died in a London hotel on September 1st, 1981, in the company of a younger English mistress whose identity British authorities quietly shielded from the press. He left behind 2 best-selling memoirs, a fortune in royalties, and a family still negotiating what his name meant. German scholarship, particularly Heinrich Brelor and Magnus Brechtken, dismantled the good Nazi myth piece by piece in the decades that followed, demonstrating that Speer had almost certainly known about the Holocaust and had actively expanded the slave labor system he later claimed to regret. The brutal fate of his wife and children was never the dramatic execution that wartime imagery suggested. It was 20 years of queuing at prison gates, decades of averted glances, a marriage hollowed out by absence, and the lifelong weight of carrying a surname that meant complicity in mass murder. The Speer family story rewrites what brutality can look like in the aftermath of catastrophe. Margarete endured a slow erasure no tribunal could measure. Her children inherited a debt no court had assigned them, and several chose to pay it anyway through politics, philanthropy, and public honesty. Their answer to inherited guilt was not denial, not silence, not the quiet prosperity of forgotten industrialists. It was confrontation. The harder verdict buried inside this history. Some sentences outlast the prisoner, and some are served by people who were never on trial at all.